I'm Deirdre McLaughlin, and I've been in Nelson for almost 17 years now. And I have been involved in the Women's Centre in the past, both as part of the coordinating collective, and I've done the Rooted in Community volunteer training. I self-identify as non-binary. And also I recognize that most people code me as female, and I get she a lot, and it doesn't bother me, but people who know me better know that I identify as non-binary. I'm not really sure when I first became aware of feminism, but I remember before I would use that word feminism, becoming aware of the need for it in my own life. You know, like I grew up Catholic, and there was altar boys and not altar girls, and I thought that was really lame and unfair. Now I realized I dodged a bullet, and I'm grateful that I wasn't an altar child. But it seemed really unfair at the time. My parents were divorced, and at my mom's house, we were just the kids. And at my dad's house, it was up to me and my stepmother to clear the table and clean the dishes. And my brother, you know, loosened his belt buckle after dinner, and that drove me bonkers. So I think those were the earliest moments where I realized that I had something that felt like a justice issue around gender. Yeah, it did. I mean, I went to an all-girls school, and so in that setting, I was pretty confident and was around other girls, so there wasn't a lot of misogyny. And then when I went to college, right out of high school, I was in a co-ed setting and just getting, we call them microaggressions, right? Daily microaggressions of like jokes about women that I just had never been around. And I'm a really sensitive person, and so they impacted me really deeply. And I got a pretty severe eating disorder almost overnight, and had to drop out of school. So that was another kind of wounding that came from gender injustice. I take it really personally because an eating disorder nearly killed me. And all I was really doing was obeying, to an extreme extent, messages that exist in culture, which is that women shouldn't take up very much space, they shouldn't open their mouths, they should be pleasant and nice, and they should look hot. And the idea of hot was being small, and also those goalposts always changed. So I never felt like I looked the way I was supposed to look, but those were the messages, and I was just playing them out to an extreme degree. And I didn't know how to use my voice. Like, that was the only way I knew how to express anger, which was a very uncomfortable emotion, because also girls aren't supposed to feel anger. It's inappropriate. It's not nice. Feminism was my first coming out of the closet, and I really mean that. Like, for me to come to that understanding that I was a feminist and come out of the closet, so to speak, with that, it actually did feel that way. Like, I didn't grow up, I mean, I grew up with strong women around me, but I didn't grow up with any women who thought feminism was cool. And none of my colleagues, classmates, peers thought feminism was cool. So I was coming of age in the 90s and the early 2000s, and that sort of like was considered a post-feminist time. You know, the second wave was over. And so a lot of people felt like there was gender equality, you know, the reasons that people had been fighting for equality had been achieved. And me, I grew up, my dad was a violent alcoholic, and he was a lawyer and lived in a mansion, and my mom was living on a secretary's wage, just trying to get by raising two kids, right? And so I could see the economic disparities of that, and also the safety issue of women when they're vulnerable. My stepmother was an immigrant who didn't really have any places to turn, family members to turn to when she was being abused. And so for me, it wasn't theoretical, it was material, it was practical. Feminism wasn't over in my world, you know? Mm-hmm. So there was real reasons for me to find my place in feminism. I had strong women growing up. You know, I was raised by nuns, and they weren't mean nuns, so I had that wonderful influence. And all the women in my mother's family, very strong, wonderful women, but not that, like, ladies. They're ladies, you know, they're not feminists by any means. So that I really was doing my own thing there. It wasn't until I went to university and took women's studies that was where I found feminist people. My journey into counseling and social services is a bit of a circuitous route. Again, tying it back to feminism, for me, survival had to do with education. And so I was staying in school. I did a women's studies degree, and well, what did I do with that? I went and served in a restaurant, which was super fun. I did that for the better part of a decade. And, you know, I studied Chinese medicine here for two and a half years. But I realized I wasn't meant to work on people's bodies. And so I dropped out of that. And actually, it was my ex-husband that was like, why don't you do counseling? And so I did do counseling, and it was a really good fit. And that's how I ended up there. Yeah, so first wave of feminism was really about the right to vote. And it was about human rights as women. You know, they were considered property of their husbands. We're talking 1800s, early 1900s. And there was a real safety issue because women and children are totally dependent on husbands. And a lot of them were alcoholics and beat their wives and children. And so that's why it's also associated with the temperance movement of not drinking. However, it was a white middle to upper class, maybe goes without saying, heterosexual women's movement. And then the second wave came in the 60s and the 70s. And when you think about burning bras, Gloria Steinem, Angela Davis, that was the feminism of that day. And it was about equal pay for equal work. It was about the right to work outside the home, and it was about reproductive rights, birth control pill. They did some amazing work. And also, it was a predominantly white women's movement. Like, Black women were like, maybe we don't want to get out of that. We've been working outside the home forever. Maybe we want to go home and put our feet up, you know? And it was also exclusionary to the lesbian feminists, because Betty Friedan was one of the sort of voices at the forefront, and she was not making that a part of her political agenda. So, you know, as you can already see in wave one and wave two, there's this move to exclusion. And then wave three, that's my wave, so I know all about that one. I can say in that era, it was not popular to be a feminist. It wasn't considered cool. I didn't know a lot of other people who were calling themselves feminists outside of my department. In my day, it was about race, class, gender. So intersectionality was already being introduced as a key concept, postmodernism, key concept. And so that was, we jokingly called it lesbian studies, because that's really what we were studying queer theory, you know? And so that was what third wave feminism was about. And then fourth wave feminism, which is where we are now from about 2012 onwards. And it's about using the internet and social media as the site of social activism, which I think is pretty awesome. So, yeah. Pros are, because this is when I was in women's studies, the group of people I was with they were viciously criticizing the feminisms that had come before them. And I was a little bit older than my cohort, so I think that might be the passion of youth as well. But, you know, I didn't see the utility of criticizing the feminisms that come before them, of writing them off, right? Because we wouldn't be where we are without building on what's come before us. And yes, there's blind spots. And yes, feminism has to be reflective and critical. However, we have to also take time to acknowledge what they've done, right? So first wave did get the vote for some women, and more voices and more safety for women and children. Second wave got a lot done with reproductive rights, and more voices of Black women within the lesbian movement. But constantly, they were not totally inclusive. Black women still criticized second wave feminists for it being a white movement. And lesbians weren't, which seems wild to think now, but lesbians were not included. They didn't have the same platform. Third wave feminism, what was it all about? And also, I think throughout a really important critique of feminism is that it's baked into this whiteness, and if feminism is going to go forward in a meaningful way, that has to be dismantled. I think that's the major project of it, really. And that goes into all other forms of oppression. I think it depends, like my relationship with other feminists who identify with other ways of feminism. I would come at it with great curiosity and respect, because there's so much infighting in feminism, unfortunately, that there's a lot of room for healing, and there's a lot of room for curiosity. As a therapist, I joke about Botox for therapists, like where you just like keep your face really like a mask. You don't move, you don't make facial expressions. So that's a good thing to come to these conversations with. Like if someone says that they're a trans exclusionary feminist or a sex worker exclusionary feminist, I just engage with curiosity to even see whether there's some room there to have a conversation. There may not be, and yet maybe there is. I'll do my best. It's a pretty complex theory, but I mean, that was Kimberly Crenshaw that came out with that, I think in the early 90s or late 80s maybe. And it was this recognition. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a Black theorist and a woman, and this recognition that lots of people of color, for example, already knew was like, we don't want to choose between being between our women's rights and being Black, but that without an analysis of the fact that those identities intersect, there is no way to do that, right? So the acknowledgement that within progressive activist groups, there can be hierarchy and sexism, right? And within feminist groups, there can be trans exclusion or race exclusion. You know what I mean? So intersectionality recognizes that we are not one fixed identity, but we're multiple identities, and those identities intersect to illuminate how we walk through the world and what rights and entitlements and privileges we have, and which ones are blocked to us or are obstacles for us based on those identities. Well, let's start with historical feminists. My favorite historical feminists kind of goes back to Mary Wollstonecraft, because I just think it's so badass that she was in like the 1700s writing on a vindication of the rights of women. Like, that's very brave. And then she had a child, Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. And you go like, who were these ladies? And like, how strong-minded did you have to exist in that time and do that? So that's pretty cool. Sojourner Truth, challenging white women, ain't I a woman? That was, with the first wave of feminism. Second wave, I mean, Gloria Steinem and Angela Davis really stand out. Audre Lorde, Audre Lorde's words I find still really relevant today and super powerful. These days, I don't know if Adrienne Maree Brown identifies as a feminist, but her work informs my feminism big time. Who else? Music-wise, Ani DeFranco was a big part of my era, and I love her. And Sinead O'Connor, again, I don't know that Sinead O'Connor identifies as a feminist, but she's a hardcore activist. And if you ever want to learn how to be a good ally, like turn to her. She does the work. So I mentioned that my dad, rest in peace, was a violent abuser. And so that was my first introduction to gender-based violence. And so it's something that I name because I don't think people can ever really say feminism is over while gender-based violence exists. And it really does exist. That these are the real reasons why we have feminism. It's one of the big, really important reasons why, is because there's people who are actually unsafe based on gender-based violence. And what was the other piece of it?
And discrimination.
And discrimination. I was lucky enough to not be discriminated on any basis other than being coded as female, because I say coded as female because I'm more comfortable identifying as non-binary. But and it happens less so at the age that I'm at now, but young women aren't taken very seriously sometimes, simply by virtue of the fact that they're young and they're women. And so I think that's discrimination. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of opportunity to think about this. Like, I'm so glad that I'm at where I'm at in my life now, because I've had the opportunity of being a young feminist. And now I'm a mature feminist, and I'm getting to see the next wave come and do their thing, right? And feminism belongs to the future, like it does. And so if you're lucky, you get to sit on the sidelines and also be involved as a feminist and go like, yes, and stay up to date with it and find out where it's going, not hold it back and resist it, And so, yes, I think there's a place for feminism. Embedded in feminist theory is the ability to be self-critical and self-reflective. And I think that's necessary for feminism to be something that's relevant and useful. But I don't think we need to throw it away. Okay, so how did I start being a feminist? I shaved my head. No, I did shave my head, and then I started women's studies, and I was like, oh, I'm a walking stereotype. Okay, anyways. But how did I start being a feminist? I think it was a matter of survival, because I nearly died with an eating disorder. And so I took it really personally. I was like, gender tried to kill me. Patriarchy, maybe, if not overstating it too much, tried to kill me. I need to find my voice and get out of this. You know what I mean? And I take that pretty personally. It got really personal. That is where we need a change in wording. Nowadays, for example, I took women's studies. If I took it today, it would be called women and gender studies, or just gender studies. And that's the evolution of language, and I think it's really important. Because saying women, what the hell does that even mean anymore? And I'm glad that we don't know what it means, So the Women's Center, I think it would be more apt if it was called Women and Gender Center, or the Gender Center, right? I know, baby steps. But, to say, how can someone be a part of the movement? I think it depends on their intersecting identities, right? Like, for a non-binary person, I'm considering that a marginalized gender. And so however the hell they want to be a part of it is how they're welcome to be a part of it, right? It's not just theory, it's material, it's access to materials too, right? So if you're marginalized, do you need clothes? Do you need food? We have those here. You know what I mean? Cis men, How can they be a good ally? I, for one, really appreciate a good, strong cis male ally, and they're like unicorns. Like, there's not a lot that really stand up and do that work. And so I really appreciate when they exist, and I appreciate it when they have the humility to understand that they show up and speak up when it seems important for them to use their voice, and also have a sense of not taking up too much space, of like letting that platform be for other people, right? But I think there's a time and a place where a cis guy's voice can be exactly what is needed for allyship. That is such a good question. And again, if I take it to the microcosm of this building and all that's happened here in the last few years, if the feminists involved had an understanding of the history of the different waves of feminism, do you think that they would want to say, yeah, I am on this side of history that's excluding these people, even knowing that, oh, the generation before me did that, the generation before me did that, the generation before me did that, and it just made us look like assholes. You know what I mean? And not only assholes, it created real harm, right? So I think knowing that history is really important in order to go forward. And like I said, it's a key feature of feminism that we're self-reflective and we're critical. Like, we take those critiques in and we do something about it. It's an activist movement. It's not just theory. And so it's about, yeah, what do we do when we know that history and we know it's been predominantly through every wave been called a white woman's movement? How do we dismantle that to make it something different, safer? And how do we use our privilege as white people to be good allies? What does that look like? How do we be anti-racist? How do we be anti-oppressive? Knowing where you come from, knowing where you are now in this given moment in history, and knowing where you want to go with that. Because if people really looked back at the history, they go, wow, we are doing the exact same thing that's happened throughout the history of feminism. Oh yeah, that's what I was going to say. Even here, right? So like, I remember sitting in the coordinating collective meeting when I was like, I was getting so excited. I was like, pull the thread of gender and it all comes undone. Like, I was like, let's just blow it up. And then like, it totally got blown up, and didn't really see that coming, and didn't really intend for it to go that way. But maybe that kind of disruption had to happen to bring it to a new era. But you see how we were already welcoming trans women here. It was just about welcoming people of all marginalized genders. And then it got kind of catapulted backwards to now we're even talking about welcoming trans women, so maybe it had to take some steps back to go forward again. But wouldn't it be nice if it didn't have to? Self-reflection, self-critique, it's theory. It's really helpful to understand the theories of feminism, but it's also about practice. And so it's an activist movement. I brought this book, and the reason why I chose this one was because all my other favorite books I either gave away or cut into for collages. But this one is called Putting Trials on Trial, Sexual Assault and the Failure of the Legal System. And I felt like that was an important one to bring because I went into women's studies, I went into feminism because of certain feelings of disempowerment. And I still feel those today. Like, I'm a clinical counselor, and I've felt disempowered in what I can bring to people who are surviving sexual assault and accessing the justice system. And so knowledge is power. Like, reading this has really helped me understand the workings of the legal system as it pertains to sexual assault. And yeah, it's a feminist legal scholar who wrote this. It's Canadian. And as you can see, it's like got coffee spilled on it. All the pages are marked up with stuff. And I just, it's a well-thumbed book. And so, yeah, I think that this speaks to what feminism is to me on so many levels because it's about activism. At its heart, there's still really important things that we're doing with feminism.